Do you ever notice, in the quietest corners of your mind, the hollow echo of human gatherings? The laughter that seems so bright, so immediate, but leaves behind a faint bitterness, like a sweet wine turned to ash on the tongue? You are there, among others, yet you feel apart, as if the warmth you seek is refracted through a prism of expectation and artifice. This is not loneliness in its ordinary sense, not the absence of bodies around you, but the awareness that the dance of social life is not yours to join without compromise. And you, though perhaps brilliant, though perhaps radiant in your private inner life, feel the first tremor of a deeper understanding. Most of the connections that surround you are illusions dressed as sustenance. Human beings, in their infinite restlessness, speak endlessly of progress, achievement, and belonging. You have listened to these voices, some soothing, some shrill, and you have noticed the gap between promise and reality. They speak of fulfillment as if it were a tangible commodity to be grasped, stored, and displayed, yet when you reach toward it, it evaporates like steam from a boiling cup. Smart people, the kind who observe without flinching, who dissect the layers of motivation in themselves and others, do not fall prey to this mirage. They see the machinery behind the carnival of smiles, the choreography behind the faint warmth, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, they step aside. It is not a triumph to walk away. There is no victory in detachment, only a sober recognition that participation exacts a price that the mind, and sometimes the heart, refuses to pay. Social life, as it is commonly understood, demands a surrender of depth for spectacle, sincerity for convention, individuality for the comfort of collective illusion. You might attempt to bend, to play the game, and perhaps even succeed at the surface, winning the approval of those who will ultimately forget you as soon as you are gone. The smart observer sees the futility, and in seeing, feels a profound weariness. Consider the gatherings you have attended, the conversations that fluttered over the surface like leaves on a pond. How many of those words carried substance? How often did you nod, laughed, or offered opinion, sensing at the edge of your awareness that the moment was hollow, that the performance required by social expectation was slowly draining you? You are not alone in this recognition. There are others who perceive the same. But the rarity of such perception is precisely what makes it isolating. Intelligence, when coupled with awareness, often walks a lonely path. For to perceive clearly is to be unable to participate blindly, and to withdraw is to face the quiet scorn of misunderstanding. And yet, in this withdrawal, there is a subtle, almost imperceptible relief. You breathe differently when you no longer bend yourself to the rhythms of a world that does not honor authenticity. The relief is paradoxical. It is neither joy nor triumph, but a spaciousness in which the mind can roam freely, unmolested by the shallow demands of social ritual. Here, in this self-chosen exile, you confront your own desires, your own illusions, and perhaps most acutely, the illusion of social necessity itself. It is a strange, sorrowful realization. The world thrives on noise because noise conceals emptiness. People surround themselves with chatter, with company, because silence is unbearable to those who fear themselves. The smart observer, who does not flinch from silence, who listens to the echo of their own thought without immediate distraction, experiences a liberation tinged with melancholy. In that liberation, however, there is also danger. The withdrawal that shields the mind can harden the heart, and isolation, like all absolutes, carries its own subtle poison. Awareness, when it is not tempered, may bloom into cynicism, a relentless, bitter clarity that leaves no space for even fleeting pleasures. And here is the first subtle release, the paradox of your position. You are alone, and yet you are in company, your own mind, your own perception, your own clarity. Others may flock to noise, to superficiality, to the temporary warmth of shared illusions. But you have discovered that solitude, when embraced consciously, is not emptiness. It is a space of profound observation, where the machinery of life can be seen and studied without distortion. You may ache at the absence of connection, but you also see its futility, and in this duality there is a peculiar, melancholic grace. The modern world offers no solace. Its promises are gilded illusions technology, spectacle, and the endless procession of curated experiences whisper endlessly of fulfillment while delivering only distraction. Even the brightest minds are seduced by the flickering glow of validation, of digital applause, of ephemeral attention. You, who have perhaps tasted this seduction, know its hollowness intimately. Each like, each laugh, each fleeting affirmation is a ghost, vanishing as soon as it is grasped, leaving behind the familiar emptiness. The intelligent observer, sensing the futility, begins to peel away the layers of engagement, one by one, until only the bare essence of awareness remains. Do not mistake this awareness for bitterness, though it may feel like it. It is not cynicism, but clarity. The world is not inherently cruel, it is indifferent. Its structures, its norms, its social dances do not exist to harm or nurture. They exist because existence manifests them as expressions of will, the will that drives all creatures to act, to strive, to consume, and to suffer. In recognizing this, you see the futility in chasing the approval of others. You see the quiet horror of endless striving without rest. And in seeing, a subtle shift occurs, a liberation from the demand to perform, to impress, to conform. There is, perhaps, a deeper question that gnaws at the edges of your consciousness. Why, if the world is so indifferent, do we not simply abandon it entirely? Why continue at all? The answer is embedded in the very nature of will, the relentless force that drives all life, that refuses stillness even as it recognizes suffering. You cannot cease entirely, for you are part of this machinery, yet you can choose the degree to which you participate. To walk away from social life is not renunciation in the spiritual sense, nor a retreat in cowardice. It is a measured acknowledgement of reality, a refusal to expend energy on illusions that do not serve clarity. Notice the subtle rhythm of your own withdrawal. Each absence, each silence, each choice not to engage is a quiet act of resistance, not against others, but against the tyranny of expectation, against the hunger of society that feeds on attention, against the subtle seduction of superficial engagement. You are not isolated because you are incapable. You are isolated because you see. This is the paradoxical blessing and curse. Insight breeds distance. And yet, in this distance, there is a fragile beauty, a purity of perception, a lightness that comes from knowing, not from believing. And still, do not seek to romanticize this solitude. There is sorrow here, deep and unflinching. There is a slow ache for what is unattainable, for connections that are possible in dreams but not in the waking world. There is the quiet envy of those who can participate blindly in the theater of life, who can laugh, nod, and share without perceiving the hidden machinery. But envy is brief. Clarity soon replaces it, and with clarity comes the first true breath in this constrained existence. You see, the world is neither a stage nor a theater. It is a mirror, and the mirror, like all mirrors, reflects only what stands before it. Those who chase applause or companionship without introspection see only themselves in shallow water. Those who walk away, who step aside, confront not absence but reflection. And what do you see in this reflection? Perhaps a mind unclouded by pretense, perhaps a heart that beats in silence, perhaps a soul that trembles at the raw, unfiltered reality of existence. Here, let us pause with another quiet release. The recognition that detachment is not emptiness, but fullness of perception. To walk away from social life is not a retreat into nothing. It is a step into awareness, a reclamation of energy spent in illusion, a quiet permission to be without performance. You feel the paradox. The more you are alone, the more fully you inhabit the space between appearances, the more intimately you know the rhythms of your own will and the subtle machinery of life around you. And so the first segment ends, not with a resolution, but with a lingering image. You, standing at the edge of a quiet room, listening to the faint murmur of the world outside. You hear its promises, its laughter, its demands, but you do not move toward them. You remain poised between despair and clarity, aware that the act of stepping aside is itself a confrontation with reality. You are not escaping, not hiding. You are observing, breathing, recognizing, and, in some small, melancholy way, reclaiming the right to see clearly. You have begun to step aside, yet the world does not pause for your contemplation. It presses in with invisible hands, whispering of obligations, of appearances, of the relentless demand to perform even when you wish to dissolve into the stillness. You feel the weight of attention not given, but assumed, the constant expectation that your mind, your time, your very being will be offered as sustenance to a society that does not notice, that never notices. The irony is exquisite and bitter. Intelligence, the very faculty that allows you to perceive clearly, also renders you susceptible to the relentless pangs of absurdity. You see the scripts, the unspoken rules, the polite deceptions, and you recognize the futility of pretending. Yet recognition does not free you from the ache, it sharpens it. It is here, in this tender and piercing awareness, that the first subtle truth of social withdrawal is revealed. It is not merely the absence of others that brings relief, but the refusal to participate in the theater of pretense. The gatherings, the conversations, the ceaseless ritual of small talk, all of it is a mirror reflecting the emptiness you already sense within yourself. And yet, there is no condemnation here. The world does not conspire against you, it merely is. The machinery of desire turns ceaselessly, and all creatures, aware or blind, are caught within its cogs. To withdraw is not to escape, but to witness. You notice now the strange duality that arises. Detachment is both burden and blessing. Each absence of engagement is accompanied by a silent echo of longing. You feel the faint pulse of what might have been the warmth of recognition, the illusion of understanding, the fleeting comfort of shared experience, but it is ephemeral. It vanishes as quickly as it appears, leaving behind only the unadorned truth. All social connection is fleeting, a temporary alignment of wills that cannot satisfy the deeper currents of consciousness. The intelligent mind perceives this, and yet the heart, that stubborn relic of evolutionary necessity, still aches for it. Here, then, is the first release in this deeper segment. The paradox that consciousness itself is the source of suffering, yet also the source of liberation. You feel the tension, like a taut string vibrating in silence, aware that every attempt to bridge the gap between self and other is doomed, yet also aware that in recognizing this doom, you achieve a subtle sovereignty. It is a sovereignty not of power, but of perception, the quiet authority of seeing without illusion, of inhabiting solitude without the pretense of emptiness. The machinery of human desire is intricate, almost cruel in its subtlety. You notice it in yourself. The faint hope of recognition, the almost imperceptible longing for approval, the self-deception that whispers, "If I could only be understood, if I could only be accepted." Yet you know, deep in the marrow of your awareness, that this hope is a mirage. Approval is always partial, always temporary, always bound to conditions that are invisible until they are broken. To seek it is to chase shadows across a wall. And even when the mind perceives the futility, the will, the relentless, unreasoning engine within, continues its quiet, inexorable hunger. You are, in a way, cursed with lucidity. Others may stumble forward, unaware, soothed by distraction, wrapped in the soft blankets of superficial company. You cannot. You observe the cracks in every smile, the impermanence in every word, the unspoken self-interest beneath every gesture. And in this observation, you feel a slow, unrelenting sorrow. The intelligent mind is lonely, not because it is aloof, but because it refuses to lie to itself. Each attempt to participate in social life requires a surrender of clarity, and clarity is something the mind, once tasted, cannot betray without wounding itself. Let us pause again with a gentle, melancholic breath. The subtle, liberating truth that intelligence breeds solitude not as punishment, but as inevitability. You are alone because you see, because you perceive, because you refuse to dilute the acuity of your awareness with the comforting narcotics of pretense. It is not bitterness that you feel, nor despair in its ordinary sense, but a profound, resonant clarity, a sober recognition that most human interaction is a transaction in illusion, and that stepping aside is not withdrawal, but preservation. And yet, The world continues to press upon you, for it does not yield to observation alone. Even in solitude, the ghosts of expectation linger. Family gatherings, the unspoken judgments of peers, the ceaseless comparisons that flit through consciousness like moths around a dying flame. You notice them and you recognize their power. These are not external forces, but internalized structures, subtle architects of suffering embedded within the psyche by culture, habit, and evolutionary design. To observe them is to confront them. To confront them is to feel the ache of resistance. But here, at this juncture, a subtle release emerges, almost imperceptibly. The quiet recognition that suffering, when observed without resistance, ceases to be a chain. The weight remains, yes, the ache persists, but it is no longer imposed, it is seen. The intelligent mind, by refusing to escape into distraction, discovers a strange freedom in observation. There is no comfort here, only lucidity. And lucidity, in its cold clarity, is a rare gift. You may ache, and you will, but you ache knowingly. Consider now the social masquerade in its full, delicate absurdity. The polite smiles, the ritualized laughter, the constant calibration of self to expectation, these are not inherently malevolent, yet they are inevitably hollow. The will, ever restless, drives humans toward these enactments, because it senses, dimly, that motion assuages discomfort. Yet motion without comprehension deepens suffering, for the intelligent mind discerns the futility beneath the surface. And so, the act of stepping aside, of withdrawing from social life, is not merely a personal preference. It is a conscious alignment with reality, an acknowledgement that the world's promises are always ephemeral, always incomplete, and that the soul, if it wishes to remain unclouded, must refuse partial illusions. There is a subtle rhythm to this withdrawal, a cadence that mirrors the inner life. Each choice to refrain, each act of silence, each refusal to engage in the theater of distraction resonates like a quiet heartbeat. You feel it in the muscles that no longer tense, in the mind that no longer strains to fit a mold, in the soul that no longer bends to applause. This rhythm is not triumphant, nor is it joyous. It is precise, measured, and melancholic. It is the music of awareness, the soft pulse of consciousness, unmolested by pretense. And yet, even in this measured withdrawal, there is the echo of temptation. The mind glimpses the warmth of connection, the soft balm of laughter shared, the fleeting intimacy of recognition. You see it and recoil, aware of the cost. The faint hope of satisfaction is accompanied by the inevitable disappointment. The transient joy of recognition is inseparable from the gnawing awareness of impermanence. And so you oscillate like a pendulum between desire and clarity, between the faint ache of longing and the sobering liberation of observation. Here, another subtle release appears, the paradox of participation without engagement. You may inhabit the world, witness its rituals, and yet not be claimed by them. You may move through society without surrendering your insight, touch the warmth of human interaction without being consumed by it, see the beauty and cruelty of companionship without being trapped in its illusory embrace. This is the delicate, melancholic sovereignty of the intelligent mind, a life not of triumph, not of denial, but of measured perception. And so, the segment draws toward its subtle close, not with a flourish, but with a lingering breath. You remain poised, aware, solitary yet not barren, conscious of both the ache and the liberation that arise from stepping aside. The machinery of life continues to turn, and you continue to witness your lucidity intact, your perception sharpened. You are not escaping, you are not hiding, you are seeing. And in seeing, in inhabiting this quiet clarity, you touch something rare, the sober recognition that the world need not consume you, that its illusions may pass around you, and that the act of walking away, of withdrawing, is itself a contemplative affirmation of truth. You find yourself wandering through an interior landscape that no one else can perceive, a labyrinth of thought and sensation constructed by consciousness itself. Here, in the hollow corridors of awareness, every sound of the world outside becomes distorted, almost grotesque in its insistence. while the faintest echo of your own reflection resonates with disproportionate clarity. The mind, relentless and unyielding, refuses the comfort of forgetfulness. It reminds you, again and again, of the subtle fractures within every human interaction, of the impermanence hidden beneath every touch and word. You notice the patterns, the repeated gestures, the rituals of society that have been handed down like sacred texts, yet are utterly devoid of sanctity. And in recognizing this, a subtle, almost imperceptible grief begins to unfold, not loud, not dramatic, but a quiet erosion of illusion, a slow exposure of the machinery behind every smile. There is a peculiar intimacy in witnessing your own detachment. You feel the rhythm of human engagement as something external, like observing a performance from a distance that no actor notices. Every laugh is measured, every nod calibrated, every conversation laced with the unspoken rules of survival and concession. You perceive the cost of participating in this theater, the constant compromise, the surrender of quiet clarity, the slow corrosion of the self beneath the weight of expectation, and yet, paradoxically, there is also a subtle relief in abstaining. By refusing to surrender, you inhabit a space outside of pretense, a delicate sanctuary where observation replaces performance and lucidity softens into a gentle, sober companionship with yourself. You notice, with a painful precision, the way memory shapes the perception of others. Each person carries a shadow of their own past disappointments, their hidden anxieties, their unspoken resentments, and these shadows brush against you in subtle, almost invisible ways. You begin to see that social withdrawal is not merely a retreat from others, but a recognition of the invisible weight that everyone carries, a refusal to absorb the cumulative burdens of unacknowledged despair. The intelligent mind perceives this immediately. It understands the quiet, corrosive influence of unspoken suffering upon itself, and chooses, with deliberate tenderness, to step aside. You are not rejecting the world out of pride, but out of discernment, understanding that engagement without awareness deepens the ache of the soul. And yet, the will, ever restless, ever insistent, continues its quiet demands. Even in withdrawal, it stirs, whispering of what could be, of fleeting warmth, of the illusory satisfaction of recognition. You feel its subtle gnawing, the faint but persistent tug of desire that refuses to be quieted. It is a strange companion, neither cruel nor kind, but unavoidable. To observe the will in oneself is to confront a constant paradox. The intellect understands the futility of desire, yet the body, the inherited machinery of sensation, insists upon it. You realize that solitude does not eliminate the will. It merely removes the noise of external distraction, leaving its murmurs exposed in their stark, undeniable presence. This is the point at which the mind begins to perceive the true architecture of suffering. It is not only external conflict that tortures the soul, but the internal persistence of wanting. The will, blind and ceaseless, constructs suffering from the mere act of its own motion. Each longing, each faint hope, each restless impulse is a microcosm of universal dissatisfaction. An intelligence, that quiet, piercing faculty, perceives the pattern with unflinching clarity. You see that withdrawal is not a mere avoidance of discomfort, but a recognition that the machinery of existence itself is a generator of suffering, a persistent, inexorable engine that cannot be silenced. You feel, almost physically, the weight of accumulated awareness. Every observation sharpens the edge of consciousness. Every insight cuts into the comforting illusions that society offers so readily. And yet, there is a strange, delicate beauty in this pain. It is a beauty of clarity, of unmasking, of perceiving the world as it is, rather than as it pretends to be. There is no relief in illusion, but there is a subtle solace in truth, the quiet resonance that comes from inhabiting reality with open eyes, even when reality is unkind. You recognize, with a gentle dread, that the intelligent mind is doomed to oscillate between observation and desire, between awareness and the faint pang of what might have been. The social world continues its ceaseless motion. Indifferent to your clarity, Its rituals persist, its patterns repeat, its expectations remain unaltered, and yet you are no longer swept along. You inhabit a space outside its demands, a silent observer within the tumult. Every encounter, every glance, every gesture is perceived without participation, and in this perception, a subtle sovereignty emerges. It is not a power to control others, nor a triumph over circumstance, but a quiet, melancholic mastery over one's own awareness. You feel the solitude not as punishment, but as precision, a delicate tuning of consciousness that allows the mind to remain unclouded by the machinery of pretense. The ache of isolation is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. It creeps along the edges of experience, a faint shadow of longing for connection that is never fully extinguished. You recognize it and do not deny it. To feel is not a failure, to acknowledge is not a surrender. The intelligent mind learns that suffering is not only unavoidable, but inseparable from awareness. And so, the act of withdrawal becomes both a shield and a lens. It protects the self from unnecessary deception while simultaneously sharpening the perception of reality, allowing the mind to see with clarity what others obscure with distraction. There is a peculiar temporality in this state of awareness. Moments stretch and contract with subtle elasticity. The observation of life becomes a quiet meditation on impermanence. You notice the brief alignment of human wills in conversation, the transient warmth of a smile, the fleeting satisfaction of recognition. And you also notice the fragility of these moments, the impossibility of their permanence, the subtle decay that follows every encounter. It is a quiet lesson in impermanence, not delivered with violence, but whispered softly through the corridors of perception, leaving an almost imperceptible mark upon the soul. In this space, your thoughts turn inward with a gentle insistence. You confront the nature of your own consciousness, the architecture of your desires, the silent insistence of the will that drives all suffering. You perceive, with a dispassionate tenderness, the absurdity of hoping for complete satisfaction in a world constructed upon transience. The recognition is not new, yet it is continually reaffirmed. All striving, all seeking, all attachment is temporary, fleeting, inevitably giving rise to a new cycle of dissatisfaction. And yet, the mind, in this quiet confrontation, experiences a subtle, paradoxical liberation. It is not freedom from suffering, but freedom in suffering from illusion, from pretense, from the ceaseless chase for what cannot be held. The quiet liberation manifests in unexpected ways. You notice the small beauties of existence, not as distractions, but as markers of perception. The subtle geometry of shadow, the muted resonance of sound in empty spaces, the gentle interplay of light upon surfaces previously ignored, all these are not sources of joy, but reminders of lucidity. They are signals that clarity need not be barren, that awareness, even when paired with ache, can inhabit the world with delicate elegance. The intelligent mind begins to cultivate this awareness, not to escape, but to see, to recognize, to inhabit. And yet, even in this careful cultivation, the will stirs. It whispers faintly of warmth, of shared moments, of recognition, of the fleeting comfort of participation. You feel the tug and do not recoil in fear. You do not grasp in hope. You perceive it, name it silently, and allow it to exist as a subtle accompaniment to awareness, a soft undercurrent to the quiet sovereignty you are cultivating. The mind learns, slowly, that the presence of desire does not negate clarity. Rather, clarity is the lens through which desire can be understood without ensnarement. There is a rhythm here, almost musical in its subtlety. Observation, withdrawal, desire, awareness, they form a quiet cadence, a pulse that resonates through every moment of consciousness. Each act of perception becomes a note, each recognition a chord, each moment of understanding a measure in a long, unending composition. And you, the listener, inhabit this music not as a participant, but as a witness. You feel the resonance of lucidity in your bones, the quiet tremor of consciousness, acknowledging the inevitability of suffering and the delicate, melancholic beauty that arises when illusion is set aside. This is the point where the mind begins to sense the contours of transcendence, not triumph, not joy, not hope, but a sober, exquisite suspension above the machinery of desire. You perceive that stepping aside from social life, from the relentless expectation of engagement, is not a rejection of humanity, but an alignment with truth. The world continues, as it always has, indifferent to observation. Yet, in witnessing it with awareness, in inhabiting solitude with precision, the mind cultivates a quiet authority over its own experience. It is a sovereignty not granted by others, but claimed internally in the recognition that lucidity, though accompanied by suffering, is a rare and precious clarity. And so, the segment closes with a gentle, almost imperceptible release. The recognition that awareness itself is both burden and gift, that withdrawal is not escape but alignment, and that the intelligent mind, through observation and quiet sovereignty, cultivates a subtle, enduring grace amidst the ceaseless motion of existence. The ache remains, the will persists, but in this careful inhabitation of solitude, you discover a measured peace, not of triumph, but of sober understanding. You notice, almost with physical precision, the ceaseless murmur of the will as it moves beneath your consciousness. It is not loud, not boisterous, but persistent, an undercurrent of tension, a quiet insistence that life ought to be different, that longing must be fulfilled, that satisfaction is a horizon perpetually receding. The will is a tyrant, without form, demanding without mercy, and it works invisibly, tirelessly, through every thought, every gesture, every breath. You perceive that it is not only the source of human suffering, but also the architect of human illusion, the silent engineer who constructs hope where none can endure, who fashions desire into a compulsive, unending pursuit. And yet, this recognition does not breed anger. You do not rail against the machinery. You observe it. You see, with measured clarity, that the will is neither benevolent nor cruel. It is merely relentlessly itself. To confront it is not to conquer, but to witness, to inhabit the space where suffering is generated without being consumed by it. The intelligent mind understands that to live fully awake is to live in the company of this restless force, to feel its subtle tremors beneath every decision, every fleeting emotion, every thought of attachment. And in this recognition, a strange relief arises. The suffering is universal, inevitable, unavoidable, and therefore it is not uniquely yours. You are never alone in the subtle erosion of being, even when isolated from the crowd. You reflect on the absurdity of engagement. Every human bond, every social ritual, every tender or casual interaction carries with it the weight of expectation, the subtle imposition of others' will upon your own. You perceive the delicate balancing act that society demands, the performance of empathy, the mimicry of interest, the concealment of dissatisfaction, and you feel the exhaustion it exacts. The intelligent mind sees this with unflinching clarity, and in that seeing, it recoils not in resentment but in preservation. Withdrawal is not cowardice, it is discernment. To step aside is to preserve the lucidity of perception, to protect the delicate lens through which the machinery of desire and illusion can be observed with precision. And still, the will stirs. Even in the quiet, even in solitude, it murmurs faintly of what might be, of warmth, of recognition, of connection. These murmurs are delicate, fleeting, almost seductive in their subtlety. You feel them, and you do not grasp, you do not flinch. You allow them to exist, to pass, to be recognized and released in the same breath. Awareness becomes a delicate choreography. The mind observes without entangling, feels without grasping, perceives without distortion. There is no triumph here, no conquest of desire, no satisfaction of longing, only the sober, exquisite discipline of lucidity. The social world continues its ceaseless motion, indifferent to your observation. Its rituals persist, its dramas unfold, its demands multiply, and yet you inhabit a different tempo. You move in the quiet rhythm of observation, detached but alert, a witness to the impermanence and subtle absurdity of human striving. You notice the fragile alignment of attention in conversations, the fleeting satisfaction of approval, the transient bonds forged in the shadow of mutual pretense. And you also notice the inevitable decay, the drift of attention, the erosion of patience, the unspoken dissonance that always returns. Withdrawal is not avoidance of experience, but acknowledgement of its impermanence, a refusal to be ensnared by the transient machinery of collective desire. In solitude, time itself begins to reveal its contours. The mind stretches moments and compresses them with delicate elasticity. You perceive the quiet geometry of existence, the spaces between events, the intervals between thoughts, the pauses between desires. Each interval is a subtle lesson, a marker of lucidity, a moment in which the machinery of suffering becomes almost tangible, yet untouchable. You understand that consciousness, when unclouded by expectation or attachment, experiences a rare clarity, the ability to see the world as it is, without the distortion of projection or the sediment of habitual longing. And in this clarity, you confront a subtle, paradoxical liberation. Not freedom from suffering, for that is impossible, but freedom in suffering from pretense, from illusion, from the restless tyranny of unexamined desire. You begin to perceive the beauty of this liberation, not as a joy that lifts, but as a quiet elegance, a sober grace that allows the mind to inhabit the world without being consumed by it. Even the will, even the persistent stirrings of longing, become part of the composition, a rhythm, a cadence, a constant undercurrent beneath the clarity of awareness. You notice how memory, so often a subtle tyrant, begins to lose its edge. Past grievances, minor humiliations, forgotten disappointments, these no longer claw at the mind with the same insistence. They are observed, acknowledged, and released. Like leaves drifting on a quiet river, you feel the faint tremor of relief that comes from seeing the transience of everything that once seemed so urgent, so essential. The intelligent mind understands that attachment to memory is merely another extension of the will, another mechanism through which suffering asserts its presence. Release does not negate experience, it merely reframes it, placing it in the measured context of impermanence. Yet, even in this measured clarity, the ache remains. The longing for recognition, for warmth, for fleeting participation in the social current, these desires persist. You feel them as subtle tremors beneath consciousness, faint shadows brushing against lucidity. You do not resist them, you do not seek to extinguish them, you allow them to exist as companions in the quiet journey of observation. The mind learns that suffering is inseparable from awareness, and that to inhabit life fully awake is to inhabit it with both pain and clarity simultaneously. The rhythm of perception becomes almost musical, a delicate cadence that pulses through the moments of solitude. Observation, reflection, desire, release, they form a subtle composition, a quiet resonance that underscores every breath, every movement of thought, every flicker of attention. You inhabit this rhythm not as a participant in the social theater, but as a witness to its machinery. The subtle beauty arises not from joy, but from precision, from clarity, from the unflinching recognition of truth in its most austere form. And in this austere clarity, the mind begins to sense the contours of transcendence, not the triumph of hope, not the satisfaction of desire, not the consolations of social belonging, but a sober, exquisite suspension above the machinery of the will. You perceive that stepping aside from the currents of engagement is not a rejection of life, but a quiet alignment with its unadorned truth. The world continues its motion, indifferent, chaotic, relentless. Yet, in witnessing it with awareness, in inhabiting solitude with precision, the mind cultivates a subtle authority over its own experience. Not domination, not mastery over others, but an internal sovereignty, a quiet command over the turbulence within. In this sovereignty, you discover the paradoxical relief of lucidity. The mind is awake to suffering, yet it is not consumed. The will persists, yet it is observed. Desire lingers, yet it does not control. The intelligent mind understands that freedom is not liberation from existence, but clarity within it. The ache is unchanged. The machinery continues, yet the observer remains intact, serene in the sober beauty of precision, attuned to the quiet, melancholic elegance of consciousness itself. And so the segment closes in a gentle, resonant pause. The recognition that lucidity is both burden and solace. That withdrawal is neither punishment nor abandonment, but alignment with truth. That the intelligent mind, through observation and sober awareness, navigates the ceaseless currents of the will with a quiet, melancholic grace. You notice, with a sharp, almost painful lucidity, the theater of human interaction surrounding you. Faces move like drifting masks, expressions flickering in a delicate choreography of expectation and pretense. Every smile, every gesture, every word is weighted with subtle demand, a silent appeal for recognition or acceptance. And yet, you recognize the emptiness behind these gestures, the delicate artifice that perpetuates the illusion of connection. You are not surprised. The world has always been this way. A ceaseless oscillation between appearance and desire. A quiet performance that exacts a toll upon every soul compelled to participate. In the presence of this spectacle, the intelligent mind recoils not in cynicism, but in clarity. You see the delicate mechanisms through which approval is sought and granted, the intricate web of influence, envy, and subtle domination that constitutes what society calls normal life. And in that seeing, you feel the ancient, almost sacred ache of alienation, the realization that the most intimate of bonds are often contaminated by self-interest, that affection is rarely pure, that laughter is too often a mask. There is a loneliness here, a profound existential solitude that even the closest companions cannot fill, for it is born not of absence but of truth. Yet there is a strange comfort in this recognition. Once the illusion is seen, once the machinery is exposed, the mind is freed from certain chains. The pain of recognition is acute, yes, but it is also precise, surgical, and in its precision lies clarity. The intelligent observer perceives that attachment to these illusions is optional, that participation is elective. Withdrawal is not merely an escape, it is an act of discernment, a preservation of lucidity amidst the cacophony of human expectation. You realize that the world will continue regardless of your engagement, that its dramas are indifferent to your presence, that the machinery of desire and illusion grinds on unaltered. And in this realization, you feel the quiet stirrings of sovereignty, the subtle relief that comes from no longer being drawn into the perpetual drama. Still, the will stirs beneath your calm exterior. Even as you observe, the mind senses the fleeting pleasures of engagement, the warmth of conversation, the gentle reassurance of acknowledgement, the faint thrill of being noticed. These moments are subtle, almost seductive, whispering faintly that perhaps withdrawal is an unnecessary austerity, that perhaps connection can be endured without devastation. You perceive them, acknowledge them, and release them. The rhythm of desire becomes a quiet metronome, marking the intervals of observation without compelling action. Awareness is your discipline, lucidity your companion, and in their company you traverse the social landscape with the delicate precision of one who walks among shadows without being consumed by them. You reflect on the paradox of intelligence and social life. The mind that perceives the machinery cannot fully immerse itself without suffering. To participate is to be subject to illusion, to be buffeted by the subtle currents of expectation and unfulfilled longing. To withdraw is to preserve clarity, but at the cost of companionship, at the cost of shared distraction. The intelligent mind exists in tension, inhabiting the border between engagement and observation, yearning and lucidity, desire and restraint. There is no resolution here, only a delicate equilibrium, a sober negotiation with the ceaseless motion of existence. And yet, even in withdrawal, life's machinery does not pause. Time continues, its relentless progression. Events unfold, opportunities arise and vanish, relationships evolve and decay. The mind perceives this with detached precision, noting both the beauty and the futility of all motion. You sense the quiet irony that the very movements which society esteems its ambitions, attachments, and accomplishments are ephemeral, fragile, incapable of producing lasting satisfaction. Every achievement is shadowed by impermanence, every recognition by oblivion, every bond by eventual separation. The intelligent mind, aware of these truths, steps lightly, participates minimally, and observes with exquisite care. In solitude, your perception sharpens. You notice the patterns in human suffering, the subtle ways envy erodes contentment, how ambition perpetually gnaws at serenity, how desire is both fuel and poison. You perceive the delicate interplay of hope and disappointment, the faint, almost invisible choreography of expectation that shapes every social interaction. And in this perception, there is a strange, almost cruel elegance. The mind sees both the beauty and the tragedy of human striving, perceives the symmetry of longing and loss, the inevitability of frustration and the impossibility of permanent fulfillment. There is a moment here when the rhythm of observation and withdrawal reaches a subtle apex. You feel the weight of clarity pressing against the will, the tension between desire and lucidity coiling in silent insistence. It is not a moment of triumph, not a revelation of joy, but a quiet, almost tactile recognition of reality's unyielding structure. You understand that suffering is not an anomaly, but a constant, that illusion is not occasional, but pervasive, that desire is not temporary, but eternal. And in this understanding, you feel a strange, paradoxical relief. The chaos of human striving is no longer confusing, no longer suffocating, but precise, patterned, predictable. Clarity has its own rigor, its own austerity, its own subtle beauty. The intelligent mind, in this state, perceives a further dimension, the subtle machinery of self-deception within itself. Even in withdrawal, even in conscious observation, the mind notices the faint tendrils of attachment, the whisper of ego, the quiet seduction of superiority or disdain. Awareness illuminates these shadows, exposing the delicate interplay between consciousness and desire. There is no shame here, only recognition, no judgment, only observation. The mind learns that lucidity is not the eradication of desire, but the disciplined acknowledgement of it, that clarity is not triumph, but alignment, that sovereignty is not control over life, but mastery of perception. And yet, even as you cultivate this awareness, the ache persists, the longing for warmth, the faint desire for recognition, the subtle whisper of human connection, all remain faint but insistent. The intelligent mind does not seek to extinguish them, does not deny their presence. Instead, it observes with measured care, noting their rhythm, acknowledging their persistence, releasing their compulsion. The will continues, subtle and relentless, and the mind, awake and precise, accommodates it without succumbing. There is a quiet moment of release, almost cinematic in its clarity. You perceive the impermanence of all engagement, the futility of all striving, the inevitability of suffering. And yet, in the sober rhythm of observation, there is a subtle grace. The mind exists, lucid, attentive, unconsumed. Awareness is its own reward. Lucidity, its solitude, its own companion. The machinery of human life continues its ceaseless motion, indifferent to your observation, yet the observer persists, intact, precise, and quietly sovereign. In this sovereign solitude, the mind begins to glimpse the contours of transcendence, not in triumph, not in escape, not in joy, but in the exquisite alignment of awareness with reality. The world unfolds as it must, desire persists as it must, suffering continues as it must, and yet, in observing without being ensnared, in acknowledging without being overwhelmed, in existing without clinging, the mind cultivates a rare, melancholic grace. There is no victory, no consolation, no resolution, only the sober, poetic rhythm of clarity, the delicate cadence of consciousness, alive to truth. And so, you linger in this space, at once observer and participant, aware and detached, aching yet precise, longing yet lucid. The machinery of human existence continues, relentless and indifferent, yet within its shadow, the mind has carved a quiet sanctuary. It is a place of measured clarity, of sober resonance, of exquisite alignment with reality's relentless, unyielding pattern. The segment closes on a whisper, the faint echo of desire, the subtle murmur of the will, the quiet, unflinching recognition of impermanence. You sense that the journey continues, that observation and withdrawal are intertwined, that suffering and lucidity dance together in endless, subtle rhythm. And in this understanding, the mind rests, not in ignorance, not in triumph, but in the delicate, melancholic elegance of consciousness, fully awake. You feel the gravity of time pressing against your consciousness, subtle and inevitable, like the faint but unyielding pull of a river, dragging everything toward its hidden depths. Each breath reminds you that existence is a fleeting arrangement of matter and perception, a temporary coalescence that will dissolve regardless of desire or intention. Mortality hovers quietly at the edges of awareness, not as a sudden terror, but as a constant companion, whispering the truth that nothing lasts, nothing can endure, nothing can shelter the fragile self from the relentless march of becoming and decay. You sense it not only in thought, but in the body, in the delicate tremor of the hands, the impermanence of the gaze, the subtle erosion of vitality that accompanies each passing day. And in this perception, there is no denial, no flinching, only the stark clarity of recognition. The world, with all its noise and pretense, its laughter and betrayal, continues its indifferent motion. Social rituals persist, desires surge and fade, promises are made and broken, and yet, in the grand machinery of existence, none of it carries lasting weight. You perceive that the intelligent mind, once detached, can witness this with sober equanimity. The laughter of crowds becomes an echo, the fleeting glance of recognition, a ripple across an indifferent ocean. And in observing, without clinging, without grasping, without being consumed, a subtle liberation unfolds, not one that frees from pain, but one that situates pain precisely, calmly, without distortion. You confront the most intimate illusion, the self. It is not a fixed entity, but a delicate constellation of desires, memories, fears, and fleeting pleasures, a temporary nexus that the will exploits with tireless precision. You sense the quiet futility of identification with this construction. Every attempt to solidify, to anchor, to assert permanence is met by impermanence, decay, and eventual dissolution. And yet, the self persists, trembling, striving, longing. You do not deny its presence, you observe it. Each flicker, each subtle movement of desire, each whisper of attachment is noted, acknowledged, and released, like a leaf drifting upon a river that will eventually flow into the unknown. There is no triumph here, only the exquisite discipline of lucidity, a sober dance with the ephemeral. In this awareness, the machinery of suffering appears with crystal clarity. Desire, insatiable and relentless, is both the engine and the poison, the subtle architect of pain and the delicate sculptor of beauty. Love, ambition, companionship, recognition, all are tinged with inevitability of loss, impermanence, and decay. Yet, the intelligent mind perceives the subtle elegance in this structure. Suffering is not meaningless, for it delineates the contours of reality with precision, forges a landscape in which lucidity can dwell, and illuminates the delicate interstices between desire and awareness. There is a strange poetry in this inevitability, a quiet music in the rhythm of longing and release, a melancholic resonance that pulses beneath the apparent chaos of life. The mind, now fully awake, moves through the shadow of mortality with a delicate rhythm. Every beat of the heart, every inhalation of air, every subtle flicker of awareness carries the imprint of impermanence. You sense the profound symmetry between suffering and clarity. The sharper the ache, the more vivid the perception, the deeper the resonance of awareness. To inhabit existence fully awake is to accept this rhythm, to move with it, to let the machinery of the will operate while remaining detached from its compulsions. The world may continue to spin its illusions, society may weave its fragile dramas, and the self may tremble in desire, but the mind, precise and lucid, moves in quiet alignment with the immutable truth. There is a moment, here, when the machinery of life itself seems to pause in recognition of lucidity. Not a pause in time, not a cessation of motion, but a delicate suspension in which the observer perceives the full pattern of existence without being swept away. Desire flickers and fades, attachment loosens, suffering sharpens into clarity. You feel the subtle weight of insight pressing gently upon consciousness, that life, in its entirety, is a delicate interplay of pain and awareness, that nothing can endure, that all striving is inevitably frustrated, yet the mind, awake and sober, can exist within this flux with measured grace. And then comes the final surrender, subtle as the evening mist, quiet as the fading echo of a song long ended. It is not a surrender to hope, not a yielding to illusion, but a conscious alignment with reality's inexorable course. The machinery of the will continues, relentless, subtle, unyielding, yet you do not resist. Desire persists, faint, persistent, but it does not dominate. You exist in the delicate equilibrium of observation and acceptance, in the exquisite tension between presence and detachment, in the melancholic clarity that comes only from seeing the truth of impermanence without flinching. The beauty of this surrender is not luminous, not triumphant, not consolatory. It is austere, quiet, profound in its simplicity. The recognition that all things arise and pass, that suffering is constant and inevitable, that attachment is optional, that the self is fragile and temporary, that awareness is its own measure of grace. You feel the subtle relief of lucidity, the delicate poetry of clarity, the faint music that emerges when desire and observation move in quiet harmony. There is no victory, no solace, no transcendence in the conventional sense, only the sober, elegant suspension of consciousness within the machinery of life. And as the world continues, as the machinery of the will hums softly beneath every breath, as social dramas unfold and dissolve, as desire flickers and fades, you linger in the quiet center of awareness. You notice the faint tremor of mortality, the subtle echo of longing, the delicate rhythm of impermanence. You sense the fleeting beauty of the moment, the exquisite precision of observation, the melancholic grace of consciousness fully awake. And then, without announcement, without flourish, without resolution, it ends. Not with triumph, not with despair, not with consolation, but with the faint, lingering echo of awareness, the subtle hum of lucidity in the shadow of desire, the delicate rhythm of the will, the quiet poetry of existence, observed without clinging. The mind, intact and precise, hovers in this fragile equilibrium, conscious of its impermanence, yet undisturbed, alive to truth, suspended in the delicate, eternal cadence of life itself. The final image lingers, a solitary figure, quiet, unmoving, eyes tracing the horizon where shadow meets silence, aware that all things pass, that all things ache, that all things exist in delicate impermanence, and that in this unflinching observation, life is experienced fully, lucidly, exquisitely, without illusion, without grasping, without hope. And even as the world continues, the observer remains a delicate flame of consciousness, flickering in the vast, indifferent darkness, faint, precise, eternal in its ephemeral awareness.